One of the downsides of bass fishing, at least for me, is the amount of time that we can spend rigging up lures and presentations. We want to fish more and rig less. Well, this Texas rig hack accomplishes that, and I have to say I'm quite impressed. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I first saw this on Bass and Bait's Instagram feed. You may have seen it too. And I thought, this is pretty interesting here, but of course I wanted to actually use it and test it and try it out. And you'll actually get to see it underwater and how it performs. Now essentially all that you do is take a normal Texas rig, and before you thread on that worm weight, take a bobber stop, put it up the line, then your worm weight, and then a bobber stop behind it. Now you have a couple of options. You can fish it like a normal Texas rig, but let's say you're going down the lake and then you see something like a gravelly point and you're thinking, man, I wish I had a Carolina rig. Well, all you have to do is slide that bobber stop, worm weight, and the other bobber stop up the line, and you can create any length leader that you want, and all of a sudden you have a makeshift Carolina rig. Now, the reason I wanted to test this is because my first thought is as that weight is working through bottom composition, whether that's rock or weeds, whatever it might be, that weight's going to get hung up there just enough, as often happens with Carolina rigs, and that entire weight setup with the bobber stops and the worm weight is going to slide back down towards the hook. And I gotta say, this is why I was impressed. I never had that happen to me once. I even fished this in some really thick vegetation that's just all gnarly and nasty, and the weight of course slid into it and started to pick up weeds, but the weight did not slide down towards the hook. It stayed where I had positioned it. Now, this is not a full-size Carolina rig weight that I would use, most of the time. Normally I'm going to put a 3/4 ounce weight on here. This is just a 1/4 ounce weight. But when you're using a Texas rig, whether it's 3/8, quarter, half, whatever it might be, this is going to give you that option to create this Carolina rig so fast, and it's more of a finesse style Carolina rig. And then if you get some bites on it, well, then you can go ahead and switch things up and maybe rig up the traditional presentation if you want a heavier weight to cast it out there farther. But this gives you the ability to adjust instantly. Now, of course, I could Carolina rig this with any soft plastic that I want. I had a soft jerkbait on this one, and it just glides up and over this vegetation very nicely, just like we would expect from a Carolina rig. And then if you're working down the shoreline, you're like, oh wow, that's a great lay down, or I want to flip this Texas rig by a dock, just slide that weight back down and you are good to go. And I gotta admit, it took me a little while to get used to a bobber stop under the worm weight next to the eye of the hook. That felt and looked a little weird, but it didn't seem to bother the action whatsoever. Now, if you are an angler that normally does not like to peg your worm weight, well then just use one bobber stop behind it, and then when you want your modified finesse Carolina rig, you go ahead and slide that weight forward, and it will still have the opportunity to free fall through the water column if you don't want it pegged. And I suppose, I didn't try this, but I suppose if you have a heavier worm weight and you do notice it to maybe start to slide down the hook a little bit, you could probably put 2 bobber stops behind it, and I'm betting that's going to solve that problem. And hey, if you've tried this, if you've seen this, if you have thoughts on this, go ahead and drop a comment down below. I'm super interested to hear what successes or failures that you have had with this particular rig. And hey, if you'd like to watch a video that talks about an alternative for the popular OSP dice and how to make pretty much any soft plastic into something with tentacles, go ahead and check this one out right here. And make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.